Hey there, this is Veena from Patter Cake, the channel that's about baking and much more. Okay then, let's get cracking with today's recipe. Welcome to Patter Cake. Today we are making aromatic, flavorful, homemade orange marmalade, something I absolutely love. In fact, one of my favorite breakfast recipes is delicious orange marmalade on toast. As you might know, marmalade is usually made with citrus fruits and involves using the peel along with the fruit pulp. It has a characteristic hint of bitterness that all marmalade lovers like me enjoy. However, I'll be showing you a way to tone down this citrusy bitterness even further so that anyone, even children, could enjoy the delicious goodness of orange marmalade. But now, without further ado, let's dive straight into making tasty orange marmalade right here at Patter Cake. Marmalade can be made with different kinds of oranges, including our Indian santras. I'm using Kinnows oranges because they are juicier. The basic orange marmalade recipe is as simple as it gets, needing just 3 ingredients: oranges, sour limes or lemons, and sugar. These 5 oranges here weigh 800 grams. I scrubbed the peel, washed them well with plenty of water, and wiped them dry. Now here's what we are going to do with them. I'll extract the juice from 1 orange, collect the pulp of the remaining 4, and use the rind of just half the oranges, that is 2½ oranges. We'll start by slicing each of the 4 oranges into quarters and then peeling and separating the rind from each quarter. Now we won't be using the entire rind. We'll scrape off the bitter white pith with a spoon, like this, or with a knife, and discard it, retaining just the pithless rind or the zest as it is called. We'll discard the bitter pith and also the extra pieces of peel. Now let's slice the zest into fine juliennes with a sharp knife. Next, we'll soak the sliced zest in a bowl of boiling hot water. This will soften it and also reduce a lot of its bitterness. Let's now cover the bowl and set it aside while we proceed with the rest of the preparations. We'll remove the stringy stuff from each of the orange quarters. Slice off the thick white part. Take out the seeds. And remove the thin membrane from the orange segments so that we can separate the fruit pulp and collect it in a separate bowl. See that you tear up each segment like this. As for all this other stuff, we'll be using it in the recipe. I'll show you how later on. Now let's extract the juice from the 5th orange and add it to the fruit pulp. Let's scrape off the membranous part and then discard the peel. We'll now weigh the orange pulp and juice so we can calculate how much sugar we'll need for this recipe. This weighs 400 grams. Now the amount of sugar used for making marmalade will depend on a number of factors. If you use the more bitter and sour kind of oranges, like for example several oranges, you'll need to use a much larger quantity of sugar. Also, some oranges are more thick-skinned, while others are thin-skinned, like our Indian santras. And some varieties are juicier than others. And besides, the amount of pulp and juice in the oranges may differ. That's why, in general, instead of using the original weight of the oranges as a basis for deciding the quantity of sugar, I prefer to go by the weight of the actual fruit pulp and juice. Okay, now let's add the soaked zest to the pulp and juice and discard the bitter liquid. We'll also add in the juice of 1 sour lime to the same bowl. And here's what we are going to do with this mix of membranes, strings, and seeds. This mix is a rich source of pectin, something that jams and marmalades need to set and acquire a jelly-like texture. The lime juice we've added is also rich in pectin and will also enhance the effectiveness of the pectin from the oranges. I'll now transfer this mix to a thin kitchen napkin. You could use a square of muslin or cheesecloth instead. I didn't have any handy and I'm therefore using an old cotton napkin instead. We'll tie this into a bag. Now let's start cooking the marmalade. To this vessel, I'll add half a cup of water and the sugar. The sugar weighs 350 grams. That's 1.5 cups plus 1.5 tablespoons. This works out to around 85% of the weight of just the pulp and juice. If you remember, that was 400 grams. This is the proportion of sugar I like to use. But when you make the orange marmalade again, if you want a more citrusy taste, you could decrease the sugar by around 50 grams. And if you want it to be sweeter, increase the sugar by 50 grams. I'm going to dissolve the sugar in the water with the heat on medium-high. And will then stir in the fruit mixture. Finally, let's put the pectin bag into the marmalade mix. Once the mix comes to a boil, the heat will have to be reduced to medium, and the mix will have to be stirred now and then. During this time, the pectin from inside the bag will get dispersed into the marmalade. It's now 15 minutes since the mix started boiling, and it's time to remove the pectin bag. We have to remove it when the mix is still thin. You might have guessed why. Yes, you're right. Once the mix thickens, squeezing out the liquid from the bag would be very difficult. 5 minutes later, the mix is still too thin. But let me show you how to check if the marmalade is done. This is one of 2 saucers I had kept in my freezer to chill. Let's transfer around a teaspoon of the marmalade to it. After a few seconds, we'll tilt the saucer. If that makes the marmalade run freely, it indicates we need to cook the marmalade some more. Ten minutes later, it looks like it's nearly done. Let's do the saucer test again. After around 30 seconds, it's moving, but just a tiny bit. If you now run a finger through the center and it leaves a clear track like this, and the marmalade seems to have the texture of a soft gel, that means it's done. You might think the mixture is still too thin, but remember that unlike jams, marmalades thicken quite a lot as they cool down. We'll now let this cool a little for around 15 minutes and then transfer it to a sterilized jar. As usual, I have sterilized more than 1 jar just in case I need a second one. If you want to know how I sterilize my jars or bottles for jams and pickles, please check out my brinjal pickle recipe. The link is up here and in the description box below. After 15 minutes, it's time to transfer the marmalade to the sterilized jar. Note the somewhat runny consistency of the marmalade. That is how it should be at this stage. Our marmalade needed a little less than 30 minutes of cooking time. I'll keep the jar partly covered and put the lid on properly once the marmalade is just slightly warm. After that, I'll let the marmalade sit on my countertop overnight and will then show you how much thicker it becomes a day after you prepare it. 24 hours later, our marmalade has set nicely. See how dramatically its texture has changed. And it will firm up even more after you store it in the fridge. Now, just in case you find you've overcooked your marmalade and it's too firm the next day, it's easy to fix that. Transfer the marmalade to a cooking vessel along with a 1/4 cup of water. Boil it again on medium heat for a couple of minutes and turn off the heat. By the way, always turn off the heat when you stop to do the saucer test. Then put a teaspoon of it on a saucer and chill it in the freezer for 5 minutes. After that, run your finger through it and check it for doneness. Repeat the test if necessary after letting the marmalade simmer for 2 more minutes. And that's it. Just look at that gorgeous orange color. Let me spread some marmalade on a lightly toasted slice of bread. I can't resist taking a bite. Incredibly delicious. Not too sweet, not too bitter, just full of flavor and very tasty. Do make it and see for yourself how delicious homemade marmalade can be. And do leave me a comment about how yours turned out, okay?